like to welcome everybody to the Fearless Emotion Management. And today I am going to share with you some different ways to begin to better understand and manage things like anxiety and depression, PTSD, any kind of relationship difficulties, suicide ideation. We're going to talk about what is the neurological underpinnings of all those. And this workshop is put on in kind of a collaborative effort through BYU Idaho Wellness Center and BYU Idaho Counseling Center. There are two different departments here on campus that are working together to put on these workshops. Just to let you all know, like, I'll be sharing a lot of information today, and it can feel a little bit overwhelming, but if you're interested in the information that you hear today, you can go to sites.google.com/view/fear-less, and there you can learn a lot more about this. You can get similar slides to what I'll be sharing here today if you'd like to do that. I'll also flash this up here again later. And just a reminder, this is being recorded today, so if you talk, that your voice will be recorded. So if you're interested in asking questions later, please feel free to do so. I think everybody right now is muted, but at the end I'll give some time, maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the end, to be able to ask questions. So please write those down as we go so that you don't forget them, because I do want to get to your questions. So just a little bit about my background. I'm a psychologist. I graduated from the University of Utah in 2009, and I've been practicing as a psychologist since that time. I spent several years at the VA hospital in Salt Lake City, working primarily in the PTSD clinic, and a lot of the information that we will be talking about over these next several weeks of the semester are based upon research from veterans and how different stress and traumas can affect the brain and the body. And we'll be using that to learn how to manage our own stress and our own traumas and difficulties. I spent 8 years in private practice in Utah before coming here to BYU Idaho about 5 years ago. And I live here now with my family. By the way, we'll be going, as we're going throughout today, you'll notice sometimes these little thought bubbles. If I click on one of these, it's probably because I'm linking to something that's a spiritual reference. And I want to emphasize that anytime I bring up a spiritual reference for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that the information I'm sharing should not be construed as supported by them. They're my own opinions, and that also goes for BYU Idaho. These are my opinions, not those of BYU Idaho. So there's Student Health Center. I want to start today with a couple of quotes. This one, many of you have heard this quote before, and it's: the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And of course, this was a quote from President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And he said this because the country was being gripped in fear at the time. And it was really stifling people's ability to function. And so he pointed this out to people, that fear is really disabling us as a society. So fear can really disrupt social functioning. We also have this quote: since ancient times, fear has limited the perspective of God's children. So now we're adding, what does fear do? Well, it also seems to limit our ability to function spiritually. So this was actually a quote given by Elder Ronald A. Rasband in 2018. And so he's talked about fear can actually disrupt our ability to interact with God. And we can look at this another way, that actually fear is disrupting our ability to communicate with the Holy Ghost. It makes it difficult for the Holy Spirit to communicate with us. What I want to talk to you today about, though, is that fear is not just a problem for society. It's not just a problem for spiritual functioning. It's actually at the basis of almost all emotional disorders. So what are some of the emotional disorders that are based in fear? They're things like anxiety, PTSD, depression, addiction, marital discord, suicide ideation. These are all disorders that are based in fear. So just how this shows up statistically in the US. So if we're just looking at US data here, in the United States, at any one given time, 5.9, almost 6% of the adult population is experiencing symptoms of depression. When it comes to anxiety, nearly 6.3% of the adult population is experiencing anxiety. So these are both fear-based emotional disorders. So how are college students here? We're here at a university campus. Well, there was actually a study done in 2017, and this was across American colleges, so it wasn't just here locally. And they looked at first-year college students. And when they looked at them, here's what they found: that nearly 2 in 5 of these freshmen were so depressed that they struggled to function. That's nearly 40% of the freshmen were disabled by depression or nearly disabled. That's much higher than the regular adult population. If we look at anxiety, nearly 3 in 5, nearly 60%. Remember, the general adult population is 6%. For college students, it's much higher. And then the most alarming one is this. Because of all this anxiety and depression, 1 in 5 college students were so stressed out that at some point during the year, they considered suicide as a way to cope with the painful experience of depression or anxiety. So I want to talk to you about what can we do about this. You guys, as college students and those in university life, you're receiving an added dose of anxiety and depression. And now add on top of that all the things that we're experiencing currently with COVID-19. There's a lot of anxiety and depression going on. It turns out a major task in managing and healing from these things is to actually retrain our brains. We want to train our brains to kind of differentiate between things that are immediately physically dangerous and things that are emotionally dangerous. They're two different things, and we want to help our brains distinguish between those two. If we're talking about immediate physical danger, we need lower brain regions to deal with that. And in fact, we have already built-in automated processes to do this in the hindbrain. You've probably heard of these things. They're called the fear responses of freeze, fight, or flight. These are already in place to deal with immediate physical threat. When it comes to emotional dangers, like these are things that are not immediately dangerous. Maybe they're future physical threats, but they're in the future, they're not right now. Or emotional dangers, heartache, those kind of things. These really require, up here, frontal lobe activity. They require a lot of complex processing and planning to deal with these kind of threats. And in other words, we need a lot of calm and reason in order to deal with these kind of threats, a different part of the brain. So when it comes to emotional disorders, things like anxiety and depression, they're actually a result of your brain confusing emotional dangers and treating them as if they're physical dangers. And we want to help the brain to undo that. So you can, and I'm going to show you over the course of this semester, for those who would like to join in this process, we're going to really learn how to help the brain kind of use 4 steps to differentiate these two kinds of fears. And I call this fearless emotion management. This is not a validated management process, but the steps and the things that we talk about are all based in science. So the fearless emotion management is not something you're going to find in the research literature, but the steps and strategies we talk about, you will find those in the research literature. So the first one is find yourself and your safety. The second step will be to learn how to ease your lizard brain. The third is to assure your security guard. And the fourth will really dig into how repetition and nourishment can literally grow hope in the brain. That maybe you're used to thinking of hope as something that's metaphorical, but I'm going to show you that hope is actually a physical part of the brain. And so we'll talk about that later on in the semester. And by the way, this fearless emotion management, this is a self-help strategy. So I want to emphasize this should not be considered personal professional advice. If you're having serious mental health problems, please go see a professional, seek professional help. This is good self-help strategy based in science, but please don't assume that it specifically applies to you if you're having a lot of difficulties, right? And in fact, the research would show that for mild symptoms, and sometimes even a little bit of moderate symptoms of depression or anxiety or even trauma, they're actually best handled through self-help methods. So they actually outperform any kind of professional help. However, once somebody's body kind of moves into that higher moderate or kind of high severe level of depression or anxiety, we almost always need additional outside help, help that we can't just generate from the inside. Sometimes that's through a professional, sometimes through medication. But please understand that self-help is always a great foundation and strategy. But if you're having more severe symptoms, please make sure you're seeking appropriate professional help. So let's start though with this. Step one kind of this find yourself and your safety. So what do I mean when I say find yourself? What am I talking about? Where are you located? Well, it's your frontal lobes, right? This turns out to be your conscious self. This is the part of you that allows you to know that you're you, right? And actually without your frontal lobes, you're no longer you, right? You're still a functioning biological entity, but you're no longer you. You're no longer conscious or aware. We really need these frontal lobes. The frontal lobes are responsible for our ability to communicate at higher levels with each other. They're responsible for things like abstract thinking, perspective taking, being able to see the world from another person's point of view. That's executive functioning. They're in the frontal lobes. Delaying gratification. Many of you are taking classes, some of which you enjoy, some of which you don't. And you're willing to do it because you believe that it will pay off in the future, right? Well, this is the part of brain that allows you to stay connected with the idea that, okay, it's unpleasant now, but I'll be rewarded for doing this in the future. This is where values are located, right? Our values, the things that we care about most deeply, they're located in the frontal lobes. Without the frontal lobes, we're just an animal. We're no longer a conscious being with ideas and values. We're just now an animal. So we need those frontal lobes. These frontal lobes require a lot of energy in order to function. They require things like oxygen and glucose. This is the fuel for the brain. And they're carried to the brain by blood. So we're going to use these letters, IQ, to represent blood up in our frontal lobes. Here's what's interesting. When your brain perceives that you're in immediate physical danger, something interesting happens. The blood moves away from your frontal lobes into your large muscle groups to prepare you to handle the immediate physical danger. Another way we could say this is, congratulations, you just became a bit more stupider, right? As that blood leaves the frontal lobes, goes to your large muscle groups, you're no longer as smart as you just were. You don't have the oxygen and glucose up in the frontal lobes anymore to deal with the threat. But that's actually okay, right? When you're in immediate danger, you don't really need to be smart. It's much more useful usually to be invisible or strong or fast. You don't need to be smart. So your body knows this, and that's why it shunts the blood away into your large muscle groups. So these are really helpful actually when you're in danger. But of course, today we're here talking about what about when you're not in immediate physical danger? What if the threat you're experiencing is of an emotional nature or a future threat? Well, having blood in your large muscle groups isn't going to help you deal with that. So we want to learn how to get that blood back from our large muscle groups back up into our frontal lobes. So let's find ourselves. Let's first realize that this process is happening. We need that blood back there. Okay? This first part is, we can call it interoception, but we're just going to use our bodies to kind of know whether or not we're even experiencing a fear response. Our body exhibits a lot of different symptoms when it goes into a fear state, and some of those things are like tension in your neck. Right? That tension in your neck is not supposed to be there unless you're dealing with threat. So if it's there and you have no immediate physical threat, you might be experiencing emotional threat, as if it's immediately physically dangerous, right? How about that pounding in your chest, right? That is a sign that you're having a fear response. So if you're sitting in class and your heart is beating at 120, it's likely that you're having a fear response. That, or you've had too much of a strong drink, or something else is going on. But generally, a rapid heartbeat when you're not exercising is a sign that you're having a fear response. That infamous jittery, bouncy leg, right? Or the bouncing foot. A lot of people say, well, that's just my leg always bounces. The reason people's legs bounce is because their brain is perceiving their immediate environment as somewhat dangerous. Your legs want to get you up and out of there. So they're bouncing. Blood is shunted to those large muscle groups of your legs, and you're bouncing around. Tight stomach. Turns out that when you're in immediate physical threat, you don't need to be processing your food, so blood is shunted away from your gut to your large muscle groups, and so we can get some bizarre gastrointestinal kind of issues going on. And that's fine for a few minutes, but when that goes on and on for a long time, that can cause some serious issues and lead to other gastrointestinal issues. Clenching in your jaw, right? Another sign. If we're in danger, we need that jaw clenched so that if something hits us, our jaw doesn't get broken, right? You probably don't need to have a clenched jaw while you're sitting in the testing center. And a heaviness, numbness, again, these are all physical symptoms. What we're doing is we're looking into our body right now, just becoming aware of the symptoms in our body that would probably indicate that we're having a fear response. Things like racing thoughts, right? So if you're having racing thoughts, your thoughts probably aren't going really any faster than they usually do, but when there's no blood up here to process them, it sure feels like they're going faster, right? It's overwhelming the system at that point. Irritability, breathlessness, feeling disconnected, all of these are symptoms of fear, right? So we can use our body, again, find yourself, just begin to notice what's happening in my body. And now we can use these symptoms as a foundation. Almost everything else we do, let's just notice if we're having fear responses in the first place. And what's really nice about this is just becoming aware. Just by becoming aware, we're activating our frontal lobes, and that begins to draw the blood back away from the large muscle groups back to the frontal lobes. I do want to give a caution here, right? So I am Dr. Johnson, but I'm Dr. Johnson, PhD, not MD. So please, if you're having some of these physical symptoms, have a medical checkup first. And when your medical provider gives you the okay and says you're healthy, now please assume these symptoms are evidence that you're having a fear response. Okay, so this is the first kind of the foundation piece. Just become aware that you're having a fear response, and that can begin to get the blood flow going back. But something scared you, right? If you're having a fear response, your brain perceived something in your environment that says that you're in danger. So let's see if you're actually safe. Let's become aware of your safety. So this is where I'm going to invite you right now in this moment to kind of get your head up, no matter where you're sitting or laying or standing, wherever you're at, get your head up and use your eyeballs and begin to look around your environment and notice if there's anything that is trying to cause you physical harm. Just begin to recognize those kind of things and listen. Use your ears. This is another very powerful way, is take about 10 seconds and just listen for safety. So I'm hearing things like my computer humming. I can hear kind of the creaking of my chair as I move around in it. Again, I'm just listening for safety. So as you continue looking and listening, you might want to ask yourself this question: who is trying to kill me? Some people think that this might be a little bit strong of a question, a bit too strong of a question. But here's what's interesting. If your body is having a fear response, then at some level, your brain actually perceived that somebody or something is actually trying to harm you right now. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having a fear response. So this question is interesting and can help us orient and become aware of, well, I guess nothing is trying, there's nobody else here in my room. And these books on my shelves don't look like they're going to hurt me. Nothing is trying to harm me right now. So if I'm having a fear response, that fear response is very much likely related to, I'm afraid that some of you out there might be judging me, right? If I'm afraid of that, that's an emotional threat. Right? I need a lot of frontal lobe activity to deal with that kind of threat. I need to learn how to maybe convince you that I'm not a bad person, or convince you of the information I'm sharing, or I need to realize that I need to change the way I'm presenting. But again, my fear of you judging me is not an immediate physical threat. So I need blood in my frontal lobes, not in my large muscle groups, if I want to deal with that. Here's what's really nice. Just noticing that I'm safe. Just becoming aware that I'm physically safe, becoming very conscious of the fact that I'm physically safe, can literally begin to draw that blood back from my body up to my frontal lobes. So this is kind of the first step in a nutshell. Find yourself in your safety. It's as simple as this. Notice the sensations in your body that might indicate that you're having a fear response, and then get your eyes up and listen with your ears to notice that you're immediately physically safe. This is really important. It seems really small and insignificant. It's not. This small step is kind of a foundational piece for beginning to take control again of the fear states in your body. You need to be aware that it's happening, that those sensations in your body, if you've been medically cleared and there's not a medical reason you're having a rapid heart rate, or that you've got tension in your neck, if there's not a medical reason, it is very likely that you're having fear responses when you don't need to be having them. So we want to take control and begin to change the brain, and rewire the brain to recognize the difference between emotional and physical safety. And I want to take a few minutes. Looks like I'm looking at my clock here. We have a few more minutes before I open this up for questions. What you can do each week, I'll be talking about new ideas and give you a couple of suggestions of things that you can do. And that's all well and good, but if you want to actually make these kind of things a habit, there's lots of ways you can do it. And one of them is this. It's turn it into an if-then statement. So that would be something like, if my, kind of think of whatever it is for you, whether it's your jaw, tight jaw, or rapid heart rate, or you're breathing really fast. So if I'm breathing really fast, then I will look around and listen and notice that I am immediately physically safe. So, and then you would actually write this plan down, and then you would say it to yourself several times each morning. So here's an example, maybe just for me. If my jaw is tight, if I'm finding that I'm clenching my jaw, then I will look around and listen and notice that nobody's trying to kill me, right? That's something that's very quick for me. It's very helpful for me to have this if-then statement, because I can very quickly realize nothing is trying to harm me. And that gets that blood flowing back from my body up to my, and it also brings awareness. So it gets my frontal lobes far more activated. And these if-then statements, there's actually been a lot of research on them. So if you want to make some of these ideas we'll talk about in this workshop, or that you learn in other places, if you want to make them a good habit, there's been a lot of research on these. This is called implementation intentions. So they look at kind of goal setting and how can we make sure that goals actually happen. If-then statements are very simple and powerful. If you want to learn more about those, you can go to the website for Peter Gollwitzer. And if you want to add to that further, his wife, Gabriella Oettingen, actually added to that to kind of further strengthen things. She actually wrote the book Rethinking Positive Thinking, in talking about how positive thinking can actually be detrimental to our progression instead of helpful to it. So she talks about mental contrasting as a much more powerful way. But when you combine these two together, she came up with something she calls Whoop, and there's a really great app for that. Anytime you're trying to implement a new behavior, a new goal, a new target behavior, using these kind of things, if then statements coupled with mental contrasting or whooping, as she calls it, these are really powerful methods for kind of integrating new desired behaviors for yourself. So find yourself in your safety. However you do this, find yourself in your safety. Become aware that you're having fear responses, and then become aware that you're actually perfectly safe right now physically. This process literally begins to help your brain differentiate between things that are immediately physically dangerous and things that are emotionally dangerous, because they require very different parts of your brain to process those. And by becoming conscious, you're actually retraining your brain in a very helpful way. So I'm going to jump now real quick because I want to make sure you have all the resources that are available to you. So we've talked today about finding yourself and your safety as the first step in fearless emotion management. The next ones would be ease your lizard brain, assure your security guard, and repetition, grow hope. And we'll be spending the whole rest of the semester talking about these next three ideas. But getting this first one down is really primary to everything else. We've got to become aware that we're having fear responses, and we need to become aware that we're actually physically safe. And again, you can go to the sites.google.com if you want to learn more about this. I'll flash this up here again in a moment. Another resource for all you who are BYUI students or staff or faculty, so any employees of the university can actually use your BYUI email account and go to TAO. There's some amazing resources. So if you like what I'm sharing, great. If you don't necessarily like what I'm sharing, go see TAO or go there in addition to what I'm sharing. There's a lot of amazing resources available to you, a lot of modules, ways of kind of measuring your mental well-being, anxiety, depression. There's all kinds of measures there, all for free. Your subscription has already actually been paid for by the university, so please go there if you're interested. Actually, right now, because of COVID-19, TAO has made some of these resources free to anyone. So you can share this also with family and friends, neighbors, at least for this period of time. Some of it is actually free for the moment. And again, that information will be available. I'm also recording this, if the recording works. Sometimes it doesn't. And if anybody wants this recording, you're welcome to email me, and I